Good morning and welcome. Thank you for being here and being so proactive. I'm Dr. Darren Coppin. That's my rather awkward photo there. I decided to turn off video so my face doesn't obscure your slides and there's one less thing that might go wrong. Now, I'm a behavioral scientist. I've spent the last decade, I guess, studying and applying how to harness human helplessness, motivation, well-being and resilience to build better lives. Most of you are here because you have a connection to ReadyTech. Here are the group brands that you'll be more familiar with. I wanted to particularly thank Mark Washbourne, ReadyTech's CEO, for giving me free rein to rapidly mobilize our specialist behavioral science division, Isha House, to deliver to you some established insights and new research to help create this contribution to support our customers, yes, but also wider community. We're truly in this together. We'll record this webinar and make it available to you and others by email afterwards and on YouTube. So this is a presentation that I obviously never wanted to deliver. Nonetheless, behavioral science is a discipline that can replace bluff, bluster and misinformation with fact, so you can make better plans and decisions. We scour academic papers, data, neuroscience and evolutionary psychology to find definitives and certainties in situations where you might be overwhelmed with confusing messages and your own instincts. I warn you, there's going to be a lot of information here, enough content for a 5-day course squeezed into 1 hour's discourse. But you can pick and choose what's most relevant to your situation. You can cut and paste from the copy of the slides that we'll email you, or you can simply re-watch on YouTube. I've also put in more wording into the slides than I normally would, so you don't have to make so many notes. In all likelihood, I won't get to your question in the Q&A session at the end. There are well over 1,000 of you joining me at the moment, but we'll make a note of all of your questions and I will respond to each and every one of you. So I'll start with a statement of the obvious, but a worthy analogy nonetheless. We're in a marathon, not a sprint. But right now is the sprint that you see at the start of a marathon. You need to get ahead and get some space. You need to reduce your likelihood of tripping. You need to settle, then monitor and adjust your plans and pace, but also pace yourself. Ensure that you don't burn out. What we're going to do is we're going to take this webinar in 3 parts. Nobody can take an hour of speaking, so we're going to try and get these down to about 17 minutes each section, which is a lot more manageable. Part 1, we're looking at behavioral science principles and their application to the current situation and COVID-19. Part 2, we're going to give you practical toolkits and messages that you can use in leading with your remote teams. And part 3 is for you, being a resilient leader. What does that mean practically? So let's get cracking with behavioral science principles. Now, there are 4 basic behavioral science principles that dictate how we behave and how we react as humans. These 4 are: we do whatever's easiest. That's not because we're lazy per se. For most of human history, the easier something is to do, the more likely we are to survive, the less calories we burn. We're incredibly social animals, so everything we do at some level is to impress others or avoid embarrassment. We are absolutely useless at self-control. Self-regulation is the least common of our character strengths, and yet almost perversely, we crave control, we crave autonomy. So even if something's really good for us, or even if we really want something, if we feel it's forced upon us, we'll push back against it. You can probably already start to imagine how these 4 principles of our behavior can help you to predict and strategize. We've looked at how these principles are relevant to the current crisis, and considering these will provide you with profound insights on how to enhance your strategic outcomes and engagement for your staff, your customers, your community, and your family. Now, let's look at what's easiest. At the moment, this is potentially a good thing. There is an acceleration of digital strategies. Most people are at home. We need to get our products, our messages to them quickly. And fortunately, there's been the invention of the internet and broadband, and we're able to rush everything onto the phone. We've been doing some studies on whether people will adopt a digital first strategy, whether they'd rather be serviced online rather than through government agencies. And what our studies have shown us is that 33% of people will readily adopt online digital first servicing. Another 20% of Australians will adopt it, but they need nudging and pushing. But up to half of Australians will not adopt it, regardless of their digital literacy. They might have a degree in computer engineering, but if they're forced online, then they won't adopt it. They want to see a person. This has been a year's worth of work, finding these figures and these studies, and it's all completely out the window now. It's all out. Everybody will be looking to service online and get online. But you need to bear something in mind. As humans, we do whatever's easiest. In times of stress, it's been reported that our IQ can sometimes diminish by 15 to 25%. I'll address that in a moment. But we have to do the lowest common denominator. Yes, most people have got a smartphone, but most people will probably want to talk. Go for the lowest common denominator and communicate on the telephone if possible. This is my father's phone in England. He still taps away on texts. So just be aware of this. And whilst you're charging headlong and bringing an accelerating 2 to 5 year digital strategy as to 2 to 5 weeks to get out there and support your customers and survive as a business, please bear in mind the lowest common denominator. This is another example of doing what's easiest. It was easiest a week ago to still turn up and hang out at Bondi Beach when your friends and mates asked each other, do you fancy going to Bondi? They would have been too embarrassed to say no. It's simple group think. But I think we've reached a tipping point now where just a few days later, it would be mortifying to even ask someone down to the beach. I saw for myself yesterday the awkwardness of passing within 10 meters of each other at the park when walking the dog. And I rejoice at that. It gives me great hope that the collective will tackle this thing successfully. Let's look at our behavior as social animals. Isolation is not good for us. Now, this is a chart. We wanted to look at a profile of human similar to what we're experiencing right now. And that profile would be unemployed people, people more likely to be at home, people not going into an office or a workplace. And we found out that when you're short-term unemployed, perhaps in the first month, people are actually more sociable. What this chart is showing is whether you spent under 2 hours with family and friends on the phone, online, or in person yesterday. When you're short-term unemployed, you're actually more sociable. The longer you're staying at home, the more you isolate yourself and the less and less time you spend with family and friends. That's directly correlated with this. When you're first unemployed, for the first month, depression actually decreases. But thereafter, the longer you're isolated, depression and anxiety and stress increases remarkably to levels that perhaps you might only see in returning servicemen and women from theatres of war. We have to be aware of this and we have to prepare for it. We're here right now. It's going to get like this, and that's what you're going to have to deal with for yourself and your families and your businesses. Now, we know from studies that remote workers were already at a greater risk of feeling personally and professionally isolated compared to their in-office colleagues. And working from home employees tend to report higher stress levels and more trouble sleeping than their office worker counterparts, largely because they find it hard to switch off at the end of the day. So bear this in mind. And isolation will amplify the negativity bias that's been naturally selected in us. The most pessimistic, negative people are more likely to survive as we evolve than the carefree optimist. If there was a lion in the bushes behind these people and they heard some rustling there, the optimist would go, it's nothing, and would probably get pounced upon and eaten. The pessimist would run away or hold their spear point towards the bush, even if there was nothing there. But that pessimist would be more likely to survive. That's why we have an evolutionary negativity bias. And today, in a world with more written and in-person communication than ever, we tend to interpret emails and texts in the most negative way possible. It's why we need emojis so people know we're winking at them and we're not angry in that text or email we just sent. Do you think our hunter-gatherer cousins had to make a winky face at each other at the end of every sentence? Well, of course not. In person, we communicate much better and much more visually. There are ways of dealing with a negativity bias: awareness, acceptance, action. We're going to be giving you tools to harness those right now and be able to move forward. And we also follow the crowd as social animals. Yes, we saw it at Bondi initially. We'll see it increasingly as we adhere to the rules and the lockdown requirements. This was Wuhan at the end of January when they first had their lockdown announced and when people were still about and working, but before they were isolated in their homes. Every single person had a face mask on. It was socially acceptable to do so. People had seen other colleagues and friends and general people in the street wearing face masks due to pollution or SARS or H1N1 in the past. This was Australia, Martin Place, Sydney, 10 days ago, at a similar stage in the lockdown. Not one person is wearing a face mask. But things are improving. This morning in Coles, I heard reports of about 10% of people wearing face masks. Face masks are important, but not necessarily in the way we think, and I will touch upon that in a moment. And I couldn't help but resist touching upon this. You might have seen some social media saying the right way to wear a face mask: one way round if you don't want to catch it, one way round if you don't want to give anything. Well, the fact is this: there's coloured outer layer is a fluid repelling layer. The colour should be on the outside. The middle layer filters bacteria and the inner layer absorbs breath. Whether you're trying to stop giving somebody a cold or whether you're trying to stop catching something. That gentleman behind there, though, wearing it inside out with the white on the outside, is probably still doing a better job than this poor lady that was spotted this week. And engagement in change is critical. I just wanted to share this with you. I went to a relatively prestigious full-time MBA, being groomed, if you like, to be a consultant, a management consultant. And we were really informed that when there's any change, 20% of your workforce will resist it, almost no matter what. Expect that. 60% of the workforce will be ambivalent. They'll go with whomever shouts the loudest. And 20% will welcome it. Well, as management consultants, we were suggested, bear in mind this was back about 15 years ago, that we should focus on why are those people resisting? What are the problems? What are the issues? What are the failings? And fix those. But the trouble is that gives that section the loudest voice, and the ambivalent 60% are likely to move towards resisting. Whereas if you focus your management effort on the 20% of people that are adopting the change, the successes, what's going well, then the middle 60% will move towards that 20%, move towards the loudest noise. And as a social animal, the bottom 20%, the resistant people, well, 10% will feel isolated and also move towards the change positively. And there might be a natural attrition of the final 10%. So please bear that in mind with what you're doing and your messaging with your teams. And as social animals, social distancing, social isolation, they're horrible words to be using, and they're also inappropriate. I implore you to use physical distancing in your messaging, because from what I've seen, genuinely, people are becoming more socially connected at this time. In terms of self-control, well, yes, we've got to force ourselves to wash hands more for 20 seconds. Touching the face is a big issue. We don't catch the coronavirus through our hands. We catch it through our nose, our mouths, and our eyes. This is where gloves and masks really help. It stops you touching your mouth or your nose, or you're really aware of touching your face, which I'm actually doing now without being aware of it when you're wearing gloves. So it prevents that. Physical proximity, it's been difficult to keep apart, particularly as a social animal. Creating new routines and habits will be difficult for your staff. Accept that and support them with these creating new routines. But particularly in young people, it seems hard to self-control. It seems hard to get them to adopt these habits right now, but you cannot blame them. It's not necessarily a choice. It's a physiological issue. These two yellow almond-shaped clusters of neurons are the amygdalae. They play a key role in mood and emotions, demanding pro-social behavior. In adults, this area here, the prefrontal cortex, acts as a restraint. It helps to plan complex behavior, decision-making, and modifies social behavior. In some, this isn't fully developed until they're 25 years old. And the prefrontal cortex develops during sleep, something that teenagers tend to significantly lack. They really don't get enough of. So there's a physiological reason for moodiness, rashness, showing off in front of friends and trying to get likes and not thinking things through properly. It's not that teenager, it's a physiological neuroscientific reason for them behaving like that. But I also want you to consider something with young people right now. What are we asking of them? We've got a sense of perspective, most of us, from being older. But for young people, their entire lives have been working towards exams, gap years, social freedom, and jobs right now. We're asking them to give it all up for something invisible, for what could be for them simply a cold. We need to turn things around and turn around the resentment. Lambasting the young people at the moment will only result in that pushback I mentioned, and we should be showing gratitude to them. That's what will engage them and help move us all forward as a species. In terms of self-control, well, I couldn't help but comment on a facial hair crisis that might be looming. Now, you know what it's like when men have the weekend off or go away on holiday for 2 weeks, they grow their facial hair. Well, young, smart, professional-looking people after 3 months will start looking like this. And what worries me is that it might spread to the ladies in our family as well, and all members of the family. So be aware of the facial hair crisis that's looming as well. Now look, there's a reason for that brevity, that humor just then, even though it probably wasn't that funny. And this image purportedly shows on the left, somebody trying to solve a problem after they've just laughed. Sorry, on the right, someone having a laugh and then trying to solve a complex problem. On the left, it's when they're stressed. We use more areas of our brain when we've just had a laugh, when we're more positive. It's called broaden and build theory. Humor helps us solve problems and think more creatively. So in your messages, use brevity, yes, and levity, but of course, keep it appropriate in the current circumstances. People are dying. In terms of control, well, yes, it's ridiculous. People are going out there buying toilet roll, but actually it's a very human response. People are driving for autonomy and trying to get a sense of control when everything seems to be going crazy. If you're fearing pushback from what you're going to be implementing with your teams, and there will have to be some draconian requirements and real leadership from the top, then get their feedback and then feed back to them. Ask or suggest what you're thinking of doing, ask for people's comments, and then go for it. That gets buy-in. A loss of control leads to anxiety, stress, and depression, and mental health will be the secondary issue that we're going to have to deal with in this crisis. There are ways of dealing with a loss of control. You need to get a perspective on controlling what you can and let go what you can't. Easily sending this little exercise to your teams or going through it or going on a Zoom whiteboard or whatever you might use genuinely helps. It seems a silly exercise, but get your teams to say, I can control how I'm adapting to things, my attitude to the situation, my determination. I can control limiting news and social media and helping others to feel better. In fact, us helping others and showing gratitude is significantly evidence to improve our well-being and our proactivity, our resilience, and our sense of being able to cope. And following guidelines we can control and cuddling our family more. What I cannot control is predicting what's happening. I can't control other people's actions, and I can't necessarily control how long this will last. But with anxiety, the key here is to accept it. Like depression, anxiety has been naturally selected in us. It serves a purpose. It keeps us aware and wary. We need to accept it, embrace it, and move on. Don't try and drown it out with drink or other distracting techniques. So that cognitive impact of anxiety on the IQ reported at a loss of 15 to 25%. Yes, I've seen some of those papers as well. But also there's research that shows that those with general anxiety disorder already tend to be more intelligent in the first place. Students with more angst score higher on verbal intelligence tests. People with anxiety are actually reassuringly a sentinel instead of necessarily being a neurotic bundle of nerves. So there are pros and cons to anxiety. So well done, that's the first part. Let's have a look at leading remote teams, a practical toolkit for you to take away from what we'll send you to help you lead remote teams. There's a plethora of information now in social media, on LinkedIn, on emails you'll be receiving. So some of that will be repeated in here. But this is nice and structured and easy to follow. What we'll cover are 5 key things: resources, working from home, communication, informal links, and support. In terms of resources, this is Management Basic 101. You need to give your teams the tools to operate. And some of us haven't really thought this through necessarily. They might need laptops, SIM cards, tablets. Sending these out to your teams or giving them permission to buy or order online, it's relatively cheap, but you seem thoughtful, generous, and proactive in supporting your teams with these basic resources. There may be connectivity and bandwidth issues at your team's homes. So expect them to sometimes use landlines for phone calls. Suggest that family members do not use high definition and bandwidth during work hours. That might take some arguing, but it makes sense in the end if you're keeping money coming into the household. But don't forget data security. This is relatively easy to address, but I cannot address it enough. It will be crazy for your businesses to go down because of the security breach. So keep this in mind and make sure that you're using onware, software, cloud-based systems where there's a wall for you to get behind to use your company services. Working from home does present problems. It might not if it was just one of you working from home, but when the whole family are there, it will be tough with everybody at home. Please let your staff know that anxiety and worry will lead to snapping and arguments over little things. If they expect it, they can deal with it. Ah, yes, they said this was going to happen. I know what's going on here, and it de-escalates issues. Have a house meeting to respect and understand each other's needs. No one is more important than the other person. Listen to your teenagers who say that they have to look at this on YouTube. And anticipate distractions. Try and find yourself a designated workspace and switch off after work. Have designated times, but try and switch off because, as we've seen, people working from home find that more difficult and it leads to sleep problems. Have realistic expectations of your staff and of yourself. In fact, we tend to be harder on ourselves than our managers expect us to be. If there are small children, arrange for practical, non-stressful working times and share care between your family members. Adopt a Pomodoro technique, if you've heard of this. Every 30 minutes, take 5 minutes off, or 10 minutes every 60 minutes to focus on moving around and focus on your partners. Go and grab a cup of coffee, focus on your children. It is natural for your children when you're home. It's healthy for your children to keep on trying to interrupt you, to get your attention, to be with you. It's natural and it's because they love you. But if you're intervening with them every half hour or every 60 minutes, by day 2, you're actually bugging them every 30 or 60 minutes and you'll be left alone to get on with work a lot more. Embrace the opportunity to mix and discuss what each other are doing. How often do you ask your partner, your husband, your wife, when they come home from work, what have you been up to today? How's your day been? And it's all, yeah, it's all right. How often do you ask your teenager, what did they get up to at school? Nothing. So at least you're going to be able to see what everybody's up to, and it opens the opportunity for more communication. As a leader, ask your remote worker to plan and agree routines, practical routines, and work expectations. We are the jabbering monkey. Communication is really what's going to get us through this crisis. Communication is absolutely key, and thankfully, we've had the communication age and the internet age to help us through it. Start the week with sprints. Be clear on what your teams are to achieve during the week and review at the end of the week. This helps visually set where you're going and what you're doing. It's a rock of reassurance. Start with the basic stuff as well that people know. As I mentioned, use phone calls if necessary, but then build capability each time. If somebody cannot keep up with a Zoom meeting, or they don't know how to get on Skype or link other people into FaceTime, they're going to feel even more isolated and they'll fall rapidly behind. You need all hands on deck right now. But build capability each time. Learn how to merge calls and share that with people. Learn how to use Zoom, Skype, FaceTime better. Move into presentations, handing over control, using the whiteboards and so on. Things are different remotely. Send an agenda, no matter how brief, before you have chats or meetings. Verbal reassurance and cues are prevalent now, not visual. Visually, we take in a lot of cues that people are getting bored, or people are excited, or people want to say something themselves. When we're on the phone or on Zoom, it's not feasible. So repeat back to people what they just said. This is verbal mirroring. It makes them like you, it makes them feel heard and listened to. Silence is much more awkward on Zoom or on the phone, etc. So listen to people more, but you expect to fill that gap. Beware of the written negativity biases that I've mentioned. People always interpret what you've written in the most negative way possible. Do not sound patronizing. Oh, you poor thing. Oh, I don't believe it, because it sounds superficial. Minimize jargon, particularly with clients. Smile and gesture, even if you're not being seen. I'm waving my hands around like crazy right now. Headsets are useful, but it's proven that if you smile and gesture whilst talking on the phone or online, then your message gets across significantly better. Encourage language. You use encouraging language. Say things like, I like that, or simply just yes, yes, after people have said things. And you need to be firm when chairing online meetings. Be prepared to cut people short, make them aware of time limits. You will not get those visual social clues that we're all so good at interpreting. I'm almost embarrassed to use this term, co-videos. But regular, short, sharp little videos to people that you can send out to your staff, relatively informal, are actually proving very valuable. Just as valuable are these informal links. Setting up informal channels for daily routines is proving essential and highly valuable. I've been blown away by how this has worked. The connection between staff is actually becoming stronger right now. Of course, these informal channels, they must be separate from other work channels that you may have, and you, as the leader, the boss, should set the tone. You've got to keep it brief, but light, funny, but remaining within the bounds of appropriateness. Kick off with today's good bits, perhaps. What 1 or 2 or 3 good things have happened in the last 24 hours. This is a silly, almost trite little exercise, but it's proven to increase positivity, mood, well-being, resilience, and proactivity, all assets that we need right now in our workforces. A morning session on WhatsApp or something like that is essential. An end of day one is great, but a Friday afternoon wrap, wind down, or even cheers session is absolutely perfect. This is our WhatsApp session that we started just this week. I blurred it for to protect the innocent, but it's hilarious. It's funny, and people are bonding much greater, and therefore they're a lot more productive when they focus on their work. This is a great friend of mine, Nat Termin, having a great giggle with her teams professionally, but then when she had a social event cancelled, they could get together with an antiviral virtual vino, she called it. It just really works. We're so lucky to have this right now, but don't leave people behind in their incapability to use it. Nurture them along initially. Support. This is a big subject. Advice, health, well-being, and resilience. Well-being has really 5 or 6 components, which I'll take you through in a moment so you know how to maintain and then try and build them in your staff. Social isolation, as we've seen, will have a significant impact upon mental health. So we need you as a leader and your staff as well to know the difference between being compassionate and over-empathetic. If you're compassionate, you're feeling for somebody. If you're empathetic, you're feeling with somebody. We know with the discovery of mirror neurons that if we're listening to somebody that has anxiety, depression, or stress, or offloading on us, If we're an empathetic person, which most of us are, then we gain the symptoms of anxiety, stress, and depression. We need to unwind, or we might be facing burnout at the end of the week in dealing with people if we're over empathetic. And over empathy, playing that strength too much, leads to sympathy, and sympathy doesn't make people proactive. Oh, you poor thing, I don't know how you're coping, etc. But you must be compassionate, you must be firm, you must feel for people, appreciate what they're saying and how they're feeling, but help move them forward. We'll cover this under the last section. You need to uncover the strengths of your team, genuinely limit media. I was reading everything feverishly all the time, and it's been very difficult to deal with. De-escalation. Now, this is important. I won't focus on this too much, but staff and clients will be angry. They'll offload that anger to whomever happens to talk to them next. So be aware that you need to de-escalate this. This is our little model for it. It's engage, make good contact, repeat somebody's first name back to them, build a bit of trust just by repeating their first name back to them. But stay silent, let the person offload, say little things like, yes, I see, and identify the real crisis issue. Really hear what they're feeling and thinking, and emphasize, not empathize, but emphasize, repeat back to them their key issues. And resilience, build resilient skills through interventions. Now look, 3 or 4 of those things there are just being quiet, listening. It's the sort of thing that blokes are terrible at. Somebody starts to say a problem, we interrupt them thinking we've interpreted it, and then we try and give them a quick fix. And 80% of the benefit in de-escalating things is just listening and being there. It's a gross generalization, but honestly, blokes are terrible at that. This is PERMA. This is what well-being is made up of. So we're not going through this. This is a week-long course on its own, but it's just so you're aware of what to look out for in yourself and your teams. First of all, positive emotion, positivity, happiness, generally laughing, etc. Secondly, engagement, doing something that brings you flow, that you're engaged in. Relationships, absolutely key as social animals. We don't have to lose these relationships if we're in lockdown. Meaning, just jumped ahead of myself there. Meaning, now this is crucial. We'll touch upon it in the last section, but you need to let people know that there's meaning and purpose in what they're doing. This is absolutely crucial. It's the anchor around which people can move forward. And accomplishments, they must feel like they are moving forward. As humans, we have to have a sense of accomplishment to have a feeling of well-being. And at the end, there's a plus or now an H for health. And I'll touch on these very briefly. This was my step tracker 4 weeks ago, a pretty typical week. This was my step tracker this week. This is not good. It's not just good for my waistline, it's also bad for my psychological productivity. So people need to realize that self-care is not self-indulgent. Yes, go out and get fresh air where possible. And this is an interesting study. Those who had more views of blue spaces demonstrated lower levels of psychological distress. Sky, rivers, sea really helped to lower psychological distress, significantly above green spaces, which I was very surprised at. So try and get more of those in your life somehow. Breathing is a physiological thing, and meditation is as well. It's not a psychological intervention. Breathe with your bellies, diaphragm, 7-11 breathing, in other words, breathe out for longer than you breathe in. They all help to calm you down and get your brain working more efficiently. And sleep. We need more sleep to perform, of course. Okay, so let's move on to the final part. I can see a lot of the questions coming in, so we'll leave time for those towards the end. But being a resilient leader, this is you, being a resilient leader. Again, another analogy that we might have seen, but I love it. The majestic, the elegant, the serene swan, the protective swan. You as a leader need to show real strength, exude strength and clarity to your teams and certainty. You need to instill purpose, but underneath it all, you can be paddling like fury and remaining agile. You need to pivot. You need to be solid for everybody. You need to have absolute rock solid policies and where you're going and what you're doing, but remain agile, pivot when you need to. Now, look, there's a reason why the little icon we have for showing resilient leadership is palm trees instead of a bicep, perhaps, or a reinforced brain. And that's because many people think that resilience is sticking your feet in the mud, grasping your hands together, and just staying solid and stubborn and strong in that manner. But actually, resilience is not that. If any of you remember the horrible images after the Boxing Day tsunami, often steel reinforced resorts were absolutely flattened. There was flotsam and jetsam everywhere. All that remained upstanding were palm trees. And that's not because they've got amazing root systems. It's not because they stay strong. It's because they're flexible. They bent in the face of overwhelming force, and they're adaptable, and they could survive it. That's what you need to be as a leader. What can you do now as a leader? We need to respond now and quickly. Our staff are listening for reassurance and direction so they can move forward. Think of all the great leaders and what they've done and represented. That's Deakin, voted Australia's best ever Prime Minister. Think of all the great leaders. Well, perhaps not. There we go, that's better. And what they did: rally your troops, make a plan, commit and go hard, but secretly have a plan B, just in case. And I've seen a lot of email communication from CEOs in the last week or so from huge multinational companies. And honestly, they feel trite. They feel like somebody's putting something out because they feel they ought to. They're cutting and pasting notifications. That just won't cut it. You need to be specific to you, your personality, your company situation, and your staff. You need to play to your team's strengths. Many of us say we're strengths focused, we're values-led leaders, but none of us ever literally measure our team's strengths, uncover their individual strengths. This has a number of levels of working, some of them subconscious. Your team are at their best when they get into flow, when time passes quickly, when they're using their strengths. A skilled coach, a skilled leader with time can do this by asking things like, what are you looking forward to most this month? Now, that might not be that appropriate this month due to the uncertainty and lockdown. So asking, what did you enjoy most during the last month? And then listening for people's responses, when they speed up, when they're clearly leaning forward, when they're excited. That is what their strengths are. If your strength is cooking, you love cooking, you might be great at it because you love following instructions, you love the self-regulation, or you might have an appreciation of beauty and excellence. You love to see the end product. Or you might love cooking because of your social intelligence or your love of other people. You love sharing it with people. Listening to what people talk about and where they get excited is a key into their strengths. A skilled coach can do that. You can probably do that. And actually, there's a key point here as well with the word coach. Coaches and managers of soccer, rugby, any sports teams aren't on the pitch running around and getting sweaty. You need to conserve your energy and think at this time. Don't try and do anything. Your team don't try and do everything, rather. Your team don't need you to burn out. Yes, lead from the front. Yes, get your hands dirty. Yes, lead by example, but ensure you do not burn out. Now, look, if you don't have time to try and coach everyone and have a 5-minute conversation about what did you enjoy most during last month? Oh, why was that? I can see you have the strength of curiosity, etc. Then you can simply go online and ask your team to do this 10, 15-minute via character.org strengths. It's a free strengths survey. My team have done it, and these are their strengths. And I can see that this is what motivates them. This is what gets them into flow. If Adrian needs motivation, he likes seeing the perspective of what's going on and the social intelligence. How are other people responding? What do other people want? If Eleni's doing something, she's motivated by the kindness that she's offering people. And Francesca, she has an appreciation of beauty and excellence. That's why I keep on sending her photographs of myself. So look, this is what motivates your team. Way above money and other motivators is playing to their strengths and knowing what gets them out of bed each morning. And everybody's different. So please actually genuinely be a strengths-led leader. We undertook a study at looking at what reduces employee mental health issues, prevention in the first place. Now, of course, this was done face-to-face with people in workplaces. There were 480 government employees took part in this study. But the keys remain exactly the same for this lockdown environment. First of all, the boss is key. You are key. When we went in to speak to bosses first, and they may have been late, and they came in and flustered and said, oh my God, sorry, there's so much going on. I don't know how I'm handling it. Anyway, what's wrong? What do you want? Then all of their staff were anxious and stressed. But when we went into people and the boss was late, but came and said, I'm so sorry I'm late. I had something to deal with. It's sorted now. So I'm with you. Let's work through this. Then the rest of the staff were reassured, calm, and resilient. Camaraderie is the single greatest well-being resource. Colleagues, a lot of this has been eroded. You know, there's not such a culture of going for a beer after work on a Friday anymore. And this is where things like your informal dialogue with staff is coming to the fore. And it's something that we've missed. And it's something that I hope will be a hangover once we're through this crisis. Those with deep care or a sense of a higher purpose are the most resilient. They were people that were off work for much less when they had an injury, be it psychological or physical. Purpose equals resilience in your staff. Give them a sense of purpose, what you're doing and how it matters to people. Staff generally do not like engaging with emails. And there's a contradiction here. They say, oh yes, send me stuff. But if they're receiving a new policy every other day, if they're saying, read this 20-page document, people do not engage with it. And when we bore down into this, because of course we have to even more now communicate with people online, the actual issue wasn't engaging with the online resources. It was that they'd often do a survey, be it a well-being survey or a questionnaire, or the boss is asking for their thoughts, input, or opinion on something, and it disappears into a black hole. They never hear anything back. You have to have some sort of response. We're working on well-being assessment, and it has to have an immediate result and an immediate personalized response for individuals, a suggestion of interventions or activities that are relevant and meaningful to that individual. So bear that in mind with your online communication. And all people wanted practical tools. That's what we're trying to give you to some extent here. There's so much information going on, but we're trying to give you some practical tools to follow through with. So all wanted resilience training, but people want practical tools that they can go away and apply with immediately. Now look, we've used the word resilience several times, but what is it? What does it really mean? And there's a lot of definitions, but the fact is that there seem to be 7 key components to resilience. First of all is emotional regulation. If you're able to experience something that annoyed you in the morning, but not be annoyed all day as a result of it, then you have emotional regulation. You're a more resilient person. If you can control your impulses, you don't fly off the handle. And that can be manically happy at things and manically angry at things as well. Then if you have impulse control, you're resilient. If you are able to exhibit causal analysis, then you're a resilient person. This means that you're able to attribute good things or bad things that happen to you accurately. You don't blame other people incorrectly for what's gone on. You know what the real cause was. Self-efficacy is at the core here. That really relates to a sense of control and feeling that you can improve your future. You can improve your circumstances and future. If you have that, you're a resilient person. Realistic optimism is there, but note it's not optimism. You don't want to be blindly optimistic with things. You need to be realistically optimistic. And I'm going to relate that to the current situation in a moment. Empathy. Okay, we've said don't be over empathetic, but people that can appreciate how others are feeling to an extent are more resilient and they're better leaders. But this last one I'm absolutely fascinated by, reaching out. Only the most resilient people, only the mentally tough ask for help. Those that need it most will be quiet. And you have to be aware of that. Look after people that are asking for help, particularly if you sense that they have become desperate, but realize that it's the quiet ones that might need help the most. So let's touch upon, as promised, realistic optimism as I come into the last few minutes of this presentation. This is not the same as the GFC, as I've heard often, or previous recessions. This McKinsey and Oxford economics report just out shows this. This is the Great Depression. This is the GFC. This is where we are now, the blue lines there. This bottom blue line, twice as bad as the GFC, is called the A3 scenario, a moderate to decent recovery. The A1 scenario is a slow recovery that's perhaps 3 times worse than the GFC. So we're not looking at circumstances the same as the GFC or the 91 recession. It's not going to be as bad as the Great Depression and the pre-World War II depressions. But we will not come out of this the same way we went into it. And that's not all bad. We are looking at 12 months plus for a vaccine. I've spoken to a number of virologists and they're saying, well, really, it's normally 18 to 24 months at a fast push. But I'm confident that things are speeding up and the cooperation internationally will speed that up. But it's still going to be 12 months plus for a vaccine if coronavirus doesn't mutate. What we can do now is flatten the curve, as you know, to below intensive care capacity. Now, look, these data, I'll send this all to you afterwards, is from this fantastic report from McKinsey and Oxford Economics, and it really is the best thing I've come across, that looks at imperative 1, safeguarding lives. Now, this is a graph that 3 weeks ago we'd never heard of, really, and now it's imprinted on all of our brains. And what we're starting to do, it seems, successfully is suppress the virus, isolate ourselves to suppress it as fast as possible and get the number of critical cases below that dotted horizontal line. That's the treatment and testing capacity, which we need to raise, and indeed we are, and we need to find better treatment drugs and vaccines further down the line. That's happening now, it seems. But the reality of this curve is it's going to be like that. As isolation ends and as we emerge from it, then there'll be another increase in infections, and then it'll go down and another increase and down and another increase. So what's happening though, if we can keep that below the medical capacity, this thing is manageable in the medium to long term. We've seen that Wuhan, Vo in Lombardy, the first death in Italy was in Vo, South Korea, Singapore, that curve has been successfully decreased. Eradication isn't currently an option. 60% of us will probably get this virus at some point. But the key is that the actual mortality, which is a desensitized way of saying the death rates, are actually closer to 0.5% in Germany and Australia. And that's because of higher testing. It's actually probably lower than that. That's a more genuine picture. So if we catch it, we're much, much, much more likely to survive. Of course, that's still 5 times higher mortality rate than influenza, but the drug treatments seem to be doubling recovery already. But that yellow squiggle there, it's 2 years long. Our first emergence from this effective lockdown could be 12 weeks hence. That's the 17th of June. So we need to be realistic with our teams that that's what we're looking at. Wuhan are saying that it will be the 8th of April. That's 8 weeks for them. And they went into a very significant and severe lockdown straight away. And this is the financial recovery. This is the scenario that we saw above, the deeper dip in the economy, a muted recovery. But what we can see there is China recovering much more strongly. And look at the US down at the bottom. And this is why Trump is saying we want to be back by Easter. He's basically looking at the herd immunity, because if America loses this much track with China, then the balance of power worldwide will shift for the foreseeable future. He has to get the economy back. And to me, it seems like he's willing to sacrifice some lives, or at least let's hope that they get the capacity up in the United States. For Australia, however, we have a couple of advantages in our isolation and our relative fast shutting of doors, is that our mortality rates are much lower at the moment, and we can hopefully hang on to the coattails of our primary trading partner, China, and lift up in future. So look, that's a realistically optimistic scenario to share with your teams. Let's have a look at the positives that are coming out of this to end this session. The acceleration of digital strategies will be good. We've all been talking about doing this online and online training. We've been developing online animated digital interventions for well-being, etc. We've suddenly tripled the speed of creating those and making those available. Online entertainment will boom. Interestingly, 70% of the people that became millionaires during the Great Depression were entertainers of some sort. Online learning will accelerate, and stronger connectivity. That means more broadband bandwidth. People like Telstra are taking on 1,000 people. Other people, Elon Musk is accelerating, making faster internet available to everyone. So that is a positive. Now, notwithstanding the fact that there'll probably be an overhang of facial hair issues once we all start socially mixing again, we've got a renewed appreciation of life, family, and the freedom of socializing in person. There is now already, and there will be, less red tape than we've had to deal with for a long time. This is a fresh start. We're wiping the slate clean to some extent, both economically, yes, but also the climate we've seen is taking a breather. But us, we're taking a bit of a breather from the hedonic treadmill we're all on to some extent. We're getting a refocus, a re-perspective of what's important in life, and it's each other. One of the things that's keeping me really strong through this, in particular, is our kids are safe. I'm so pleased that not with the bubonic plague, not with cholera, were children safe. With this, our children seem to be much safer, and that's something to rejoice in. And finally, the best of humanity is emerging. While some people, we might be fighting for toilet rolls, that's because we're looking out for our family usually. But we're seeing car and perfume factories turning to making personal protective equipment and ventilators. Hotels and exhibition spaces are donating themselves and becoming hospitals. Hundreds of thousands of people are volunteering to support the health effort. That capacity is leaping up beyond what we might have ever expected or imagined. And the international cooperation is increasing significantly, albeit online. I do worry there'll be a sense of xenophobia coming out of this, and international travel will be restricted, but international cooperation and the sense, as we started this talk, that we're all in this together is really coming to the fore. So lastly, please let us know what you need more of. As I mentioned, we've been developing that suite of animated digital wellbeing and resilience interventions, but you might actually want company-wide wellbeing assessment, remote working webinar, resilience training for staff. Just let us know and we'll be there to support you. We'll work flexibly to help. I'll go on to a few questions before I summarize. Adrian, over to you. Could you send me over some questions? Okay, so we had some questions asking what is PERMA, which I hope we've answered. Let's have a look. Any other questions there, Adrian? Okay, I'll have a look at the Q&A.
Yeah,
Yes,
Darren, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I was on mute there. I've left open questions for you on the Q&A section.
Ah, brilliant. Thanks, Adi. So you're saying to get more sleep, which sounds good, but I have yes, we're all having great difficulty switching off at the moment and waking up, staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night. It's quite a trite thing to say, well, get more sleep, and saying it's important makes you worry about it more and makes you less likely to get more sleep. The best way of getting more sleep is knackering yourself out with exercise. We've all got sheds full of dusty things that we bought in a moment of inspiration and proactivity, like step machines and stomach crunch machines and what have you. But try and exhaust yourself. This is something I'm going to do physically, because mentally you won't be switching off. Is it preferable to have at least a conference call or Skype with all team members to address issues or questions? Yes, it's great to have a group team conference call, but please be aware the quiet ones, the ones that might need help the most, will be quiet. So afterwards, phone around people and have a one-to-one. That's absolutely essential to have the one-to-one afterwards. But having a sense of we're all in this together, we're all sharing issues, somebody will say something and others will say, yes, yeah, I was feeling like that as well. And it really brings us closer together. Engagement contradiction. How do I deal with that? Well, that's what I just said. Have the chats one-to-one if you can. I assume that's what you were addressing. Best way to manage staff productivity when working from home. Any suggested programs? There are a lot of programs coming up online. We've provided you with some pointers. And the key for you, though, is to be realistic with your expectations. Listen to what your staff member is saying in terms of, there's me home, there's my husband home now, I've got a teenager, and I've got 2 small children, and my husband's got to work online as well as I have. How do I deal with this? I can only do it after I put the kids to bed, and then I'm exhausted. Take the pressure off of them and say, well, I'm expecting you to do half a day of productivity at the moment, and we'll build up from there as things settle. That half a day of productivity will be better than the full day of worried, anxious, not really getting anything done. It's about them sharing things with everybody at home. Connectivity might be a challenge. Yes, telephone support is the best way to support those team members and clarify things in short, sharp emails afterwards, and text messages always get through better, of course. Any tips on how having to cut staff hours due to less work and how best to broach it? Your staff will already be worried about that and thinking it's going to happen. When you tell them, to some extent, it might be a blessed relief. And you're doing it to try and save the business so that you can take them back on afterwards. So there will be a level of expectation, and it will not be as difficult as you might expect. Thank you, Heather G. Thank you. Without the bullshit, you said as well, which is very unusual for me. So thank you for that comment. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll look at the rest of these questions, but you also have our email address, so please send them to us afterwards. The presentation today will be emailed to you in a PDF format, but we'll be uploading it to YouTube almost immediately. So some of your questions I haven't got to. Adrian, you said there's a verbal question you wanted to bounce off of me lastly. I'll give you that's caught you out, hasn't it, Adi? Well,
yeah, it's not me. It's from Danielle. She's got a hand up. If Danielle's still there, I was just going to just let Danielle ask the question.
Miss Danielle down in Tasmania.
Danielle,
I'm assuming.
Unmute.
Okay.
Is it working?
If not, then then send it in the Q&A right now, and I'll answer it directly over the next day or two.
And same with Yenny as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer those online. So look, we're out of time with this as well. I will answer all questions in an email to you all, and we will provide a YouTube link to this presentation that we've recorded. Finally, I want you to listen to me. This particular sign off, I guess. You are a leader, whether it's in your sector, your company, your community, or your family. So heed this advice. You probably have butterflies in your stomach. You might feel that you cannot see answers from so much information, but you've got to be strong. You've got to be certain. You have to be firm. Behind the scenes, you'll be flexible, responsive, adaptable, and scared. But those looking to you, and they will be looking to you, will see your chin set and determined. Your clarity will be palpable. I cannot emphasize this enough. Instill your teams with a genuine sense of purpose and mission right now. It gives them back a sense of control, gives them back a sense of perspective, and it gives us all more than a fighting chance. So I'll leave you with Churchill, which I couldn't resist. Now, this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. I think we all know what we need to do. So thank you all for attending, and be safe.